welcome to my little presentation on Ponderosa pine and pine needle baskets. We're going to be talking about Pinus ponderosa, learn a little bit about it, talk about the people who have used it, and all of the good things it's used for, besides just being a tree and existing, which is great. And after that, we'll get started and make our basket. Ponderosa pines are large trees that commonly grow 60 to 100 feet tall, sometimes reaching heights around 200 feet. Their large, long needles grow in clusters of 3 and are unmistakable compared to their pine family members. They will keep the same needles for several years, shed old needles during fall, which is a good time to pick them up off the ground around the tree or pluck the brown, dry needles right off the tree. And ponderosa bark is dark brown when the tree is young and turns cinnamon brown, sometimes evolving into an orange hue when the tree is older. The bark is recognizable because it is deeply and irregularly furrowed. Ponderosa pine reproduces by seed, of course. It is an angiosperm, and the male parts will produce the pollen, and when the pollen goes all over the place, all over the air, it'll go up to the female cones that contain the ovaries, and they will become pollinated, hopefully, and the cones mature in a 2-year cycle, while the tree flowers from April to June of the first year, and cones mature and shed seeds in August and September of the second year, and they will usually go maybe no more than 100 feet. The seeds are pretty small, usually wind dispersal, like most conifers, and so pretty close to the tree, relatively speaking. So here we have the ponderosa at some different life stages. You might notice that the ponderosa pine is a large, straight-trunked tree with a wide open, irregularly cylindrical crown. The narrow, broad, pyramid-shaped crown on the younger trees on the left begins to flatten out on the older trees, and it also has some lower branch loss as well. The native range of ponderosa pine extends from southern Canada into Mexico and from the plain states of Nebraska and Oklahoma to the Pacific coast. Ponderosa pine is the most widely distributed pine species in North America. Ponderosa pine was most valued for its antiseptic properties, using it to treat a range of skin problems including cuts, wounds, burns, etc. It was also valued for its beneficial effect on the respiratory system. The turpentine obtained from the resin of all pine trees is antiseptic. The inner bark of the ponderosa pine can be eaten raw or cooked if you want. The seed, which is rich in oil, can be ground up to make a flour used in bread making or just pine needle oil. The seeds and cambium were often eaten, wood used as a construction material, and boughs used for fire and cooking. The pine needles make an excellent weaving material due to their long and sturdy structure that is easy to manipulate. So the inner bark of pine contains substances that were important complements to the protein-rich food of indigenous peoples living in northern regions of North America, mostly carbohydrates, dietary fiber, vitamin C, and minerals. The pine seeds can also be harvested once the female pine cones open up to spread the seeds. The bark can be harvested and peeled at any time for consumption or building materials. The basket that I'm about to make is based on the Secwepemc people of present-day British Columbia. But before we go any further, let's listen to me say that again, but slower.
Secwepemc, 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 Secwepemc.
Okay, so the Secwepemc people are a nation of 17 tribes that expand the south-central portion of British Columbia. They are known to make traditional crafts and baskets using Pinus ponderosa. The Secwepemc people are known by non-natives as the Shuswap, and the nation formed as a political alliance and protected and regulated use of land and resources like pipelines, land development, all of it. Geographically, this traditional territory stretches from the Columbia River Valley along the Rocky Mountains, west to the Fraser River, and south to the Arrow Lakes. So these are some of the baskets of the Secwepemc people. They've been weaving baskets for thousands of years. Some of these baskets in the picture are cedar. The second to left on the bottom is pine needle, and the bottom right is also pine needle. They also use birch. These baskets were prized for household use and storage, as well as for trade. Traditionally, the clumps of needles were sewn together with a thread from inside of cedar bark that was peeled, or from animal sinew. And a traditional sewing needle might be constructed from bone of one of those animals, or carved from Pacific yew. So now that we know what we're looking for, it's time to go find some needles. These are some Ponderosa pine needles I collected from a little bit east of Stevens Pass on Highway 2. I went as far as Leavenworth to find them, and they are everywhere over there, so it is not difficult to find once you reach a certain area. Ponderosa pines do very well in drier climates because they have such an extensive and deep taproot and fibrous network of roots. That's why you might see them in areas where it might seem out of place to have a huge pine tree, but they do really well in the more arid climates as well. Bring your pine needles home, you want to wash them in the sink with some soap and water to get all of the bugs and clean some of the mildew off. If you're not going to use them right away, you can lie them out in a darker area to semi-bleach them. It just depends on how you want them to look. But if you lie them out to dry for a couple of days, you can store them in a cardboard box for later. To prepare the needles for weaving, you want to boil them in some water for a couple of minutes, maybe let them sit in the steam for a little bit afterwards once you've drained the water. And it's important to keep them hydrated, so you can wrap them in a towel or a plastic bag, and you can mist them every once in a while if they become dry. The tools and supplies that you need to create your basket are the pine needles, a towel or something to keep them wrapped up in, maybe a spray bottle full of warm water for misting, which I did have, but it's not pictured. On the left is artificial sinew, which I didn't end up using. I found the waxed polyester thread in the middle, to the right of it, to be a little bit easier, because you have to divide the sinew into different pieces, and it just kind of takes a long time and it's messy. You need a big sewing needle, a pair of regular scissors, a pair of pliers. I used a little pair of jewelry pliers, and a paper straw that's cut to about 2.5 inches. You can also use a piece of metal, any type of guide that you can find to thread your needles through. So first we're going to remove the caps from the pine needle clusters with our fingernails. It's okay if they come apart, but it's easier to work while they're in clusters versus singular needles. Next, we're going to fill our guide with some of our pine needles. You want to still be able to slide the guide up and down, but it should be kind of tight and hard to do. Now we're going to tie a double knot around our cluster and just get it nice and secure. This will be the beginning of our coil that we'll make. After you have your knot, you can begin to wrap the thread around the pine needles. You want to go in the direction towards your guide, and if you have some extra thread hanging loose, you can just cover it while you're wrapping. Now just cut the end of the threaded area off. It should be the end where the pine caps were. Now just fold it in half. This will start making our coil shape, and we're going to stitch through the ends of the thread. Just secure those together. If it's hard to pull through, you can use your pliers. Something got stuck in there. So here I am using the pliers to pull it through on my second stitch. We're just going to keep threading it all the way up towards the U part of the coil. And we want to stitch pretty much every few centimeters to do that. And now to hide the thread and we can get back to where we left off, we can just go underneath, pull it through with the pliers, get it back to where we left off without thread being all over the place. So now we're just going to continue wrapping it. And then once we get a little further, we can sew it into the end, kind of like we did before. Wrap a little bit more. And then once we have a little bit more wrapped on there, we can bend it again. So now we're really starting to get the coil shape. And then we'll sew that end onto the very beginning. And now we have a pretty good little circle. And now I'm just going to continue stitching it in every few centimeters. And wrapping. It's not going to be like this the whole basket. This is just for our coil. Alright, so that's pretty much the coil. If you run low on pine needles, you need to make sure you're keeping it filled up. I kind of forgot at the beginning, so it looks pretty low. But that will really save you the whole time that we're doing this. If you run out of thread, just get 2 more arm's lengths of thread and then just tie it in a double knot where you left off, and you can cut off the loose ends. So now that my coil is pretty much done, I'm going to start doing single stitches here. Just every few centimeters, stitch it around the pine needles and then stitch it back into the coil. Helps if you go through the sides, that way you don't really see it coming in or out, and the stitches look pretty neat. So this is the time lapse, and I'm just doing that exact same thing all the way around. I'm stitching it a little bit to the right of where I left off, that way I get that nice little zigzag shape. So those are just single stitches that whole time. Now I'm going to start to raise the basket a little bit, and you can do it whenever you want to. And I'm going to start making V shapes at this point. So I'm going to do V stitches for the basket walls, and you just put the needle in the same place twice to do that. Helps if you sew through the old thread every once in a while. It just helps secure your basket, make it tighter. So you can see it's starting to make that V shape, and we'll do that all the way up. So once you have your chosen height of your basket, you can take the guide off of the remaining needles, remove it, and then just finish it. Keep doing the same thing until you run out of needles to sew. And I chose to do a little double knot at the very end of mine. You could also just sew it in a little bit more cleverly. I'll probably burn it to make it less noticeable. Not burn the basket, just the thread. You can cut off any little pieces also that are sticking out and bothering you. So that is the basket pretty much. The V-stitch took a little bit of time to get used to, but I think it turned out pretty nicely. Now you just need to put something in it. And there you go. So this is the next day. My basket dried a little bit, and it is a little bit sturdier and just really nice shape. Alright, thank you for watching.